Joining me will be Bill Gensky, Senior Estimator with MMC, Clint Kimball, Director of Precon with Flintco, and Steve Dell'Orto, Founder and CEO of ConCntric. So let's start with a quick introduction, keeping it to less than 20 minutes each. Bill?
I just appreciate your humor, first of all. My name is Bill Gensky. I'm with MMC Contractors. We're a mechanical plumbing contractor. We do work in most of the country. We're based in the Midwest. I'm a senior estimator and a pre-construction manager, currently working on a government project in our home area.
Clint Kimball, Director of Preconstruction with Flintco. I work out of our Arkansas office. Flintco is based out of the Midwest for the most part, with our corporate office in Tulsa. We have offices in Oklahoma City, Memphis, here in Denver, Austin, San Antonio, Houston. I don't think I missed anything. And then we have our sister company, which is Alberici as well, based in St. Louis. So we do a lot of projects together with them. So between the two of us, we are very healthy and strong in all markets.
I'm Steve Dell'Orto. I'm CEO and founder of ConCntric. We are a holistic pre-construction platform built specifically for the construction industry. Formerly, I was 26 years with Clark Construction as an executive officer, growing the first or second largest business unit within the company to over $2 billion. Significant experience on projects large and small, but ultimately started ConCntric to solve what I see as the big overwhelming issues within the industry about how projects are planned and do that in a much more effective way. So I'm excited to be on this panel with these two gentlemen today.
And we have about 36 questions to go to, but if you have some questions for the audience, please get on your Slido and scan that in and send them on. So let's hit it off with number one. Talking about delays in the supply chain, is this something forever that it will always be a problem, or is it just old ways of doing things?
I'll go.
Go ahead.
Why not? I don't know if it's the old way of doing things. It's the current state we're in, and I don't see it changing for a while. We saw the stuff this morning talking about how it's not slowing down. It's going to keep going. There's still big, large organizations that are calling and ordering everything that's available. So their supply chain is going to be something we're going to be dealing with for quite some time. And so I think it's a matter of those strategic partnerships and working with, coming from the general contractor side, working with our trade partners, getting them to a seat at the table early, working through the design aspect with our design partners, and figuring out what's the early procurement, what are those long lead items, and then looking for opportunities to engage them and implement that early.
Yeah, I would say that also having an idea of what market you're working in, what equipment and materials are required, can have a lot to do with how much of a supply chain issue we may end up having. Some industries, some markets are really heavily hitting certain types of equipment or material, and you kind of have to take that into account as best you can on the front end. We try to do that as much as we can during an RFP process, trying to find and identify those issues so that we can have a plan in place as we go forward and start to get into the actual production of the project. We know what our plan is, and we can mitigate that as best as possible.
But I think it also speaks to the value of pre-construction and how incredibly important it is to be planning and thinking these issues through in great detail as early as possible. And while you'll always have a supply chain issue on some form of material or equipment, I don't see that changing or going away. How do we not just react, but more proactively work to make that a non-issue? More options, up front that can be considered to go a different route than the route that might take you down where you are going to encounter a project level problem. So the earlier the better, and the more detailed you can be in your planning is one of the possible solutions to supply chain challenges.
And that actually is the answer to our second question here is basically when should you first be considering this? And as you said, Bill, it's when you get the RFP. You've got to be looking at that and you've got to say, you know, what here stands out? We just bid a job and I shared a little bit about it yesterday in a seminar and we said, hey, this is our schedule, but the switchgear was as long as the building in terms of its critical, its lead time. So we figured out some other ways to, what we had to tell the owner basically, and we found some alternatives as well. Anything else on that?
Yeah, I was just going to say that on a particular project we're working on right now, we had kind of an unusual material requirement, and that was one that we identified very early on for two reasons. One, actual supply. How much availability of this type of material is there? Because it's simply not used that much anymore, but this particular client had a very rigid requirement to use that. So we had to do two things, again, at the RFP phase. We were trying to identify sources so that we knew we had the material available we could get. And then we're going to have so much of it, we wanted to talk about material multipliers early on so that we could have an accurate cost for budgeting purposes going forward. So that was key for us, was looking across the whole project, and that one kind of stuck out. And we said, okay, we need to do something about this, and we were able to do that, and it's worked very well for us.
Was that material asbestos?
I can tell you a funny one is I had a tile, a very specific spa green tile out of one place in China, the only place that mines this tile, and it was for an expansion project on a certain project that for over a year, it was touch and go, it was during COVID, whether we were going to get that tile or not. So much so that we had some folks from other companies assisting us with some of our Chinese to go and make sure that we could find people who were, going to be able to, get the factory, or not the factory, the mine and quarry up and running again. It's just what it takes.
Well, as much as possible, as you can, as a contractor, if we just approach it from that perspective, as a valuable member of the planning and pre-construction team, ultimately what the owner and what we all seek is a certainty of outcome, and we just don't want surprises. And so in order to drive certainty of outcome, you have to have options in front of you, you have to have experience, you have to have data to draw from. So the more and more that we can really start to drive a little bit more of the support of the pre-construction personnel, the talent that's doing this day in and day out, with information at their fingertips, so that way, maybe even before the designer designs the building around that particular tile, there's options A, B, and C that can be discussed before you even get too far down the road with that choice. Again, being a lot more proactive, which is right now very, very hard for pre-construction professionals because you're busier than, beyond belief. You're 150% of your natural capacity because you're having to do everything so manually in a very analog way. But if that information is almost fed to you from your prior projects or from some other broader source, you can just be that much smarter and that much more efficient and that much more of a contributor to providing that certainty of outcome as a service to your customer.
Klint, how are you doing?
Doing good.
Klint, who needs a seat at the table to drive effective early decision making?
Well, for starters, we as a general contractor need a seat at the table. In our world, we do almost all CM work. We very rarely do a hard bid scenario on any of our projects. So we're involved typically from cocktail napkin forward. We have a lot of clients that come to us and say, hey, I have this idea. And our job is to give them a realistic budget, which is the most ridiculous thing in the world sometimes, but that's what we have to do. So we're at the table. And so one of the things that we leverage is our operations teams, because as pre-con, we have shiny shoes, we don't get dirty, they don't let us go outside because they're afraid we're going to have a safety violation and get hurt. But
That's
a
real problem.
it is. So we leverage our operations teams and our superintendents, construction directors, our project managers. From the very beginning, they're involved in a pre-con process, which is a little bit unique. We are connected at the hip with the construction director over a project. They're involved from the very beginning. And as we go through, we start identifying what are going to be the things that are going to drive this project schedule. And whether it is mechanical equipment, whether it is, at one point, I'm sure we all found out roofing was a long lead item for 9 months. Like, whoever thought roofing was going to be a long lead item and drive a schedule, but it was. Identifying what those are, so we have those trade partners engaged early as well to help identify what is happening in the market. We're also reaching out to suppliers to identify what's happening, what's going on, manufacturers. Having those relationships is key. So getting them involved at the very beginning and having their engagement throughout the process to identify what is going to be a problem, what is a challenge, even down to the shippers. We're lucky in Northwest Arkansas, JB Hunt Trucking, largest trucking company in North America, is right down the street. So we have the ability to reach out to even the shipping companies and find out what's going on in the shipping industry.
Well, that I think points to why everybody in pre-con is at 150% capacity, because that is all a person taking the initiative and spending their valuable people hours chasing that kind of information down. But again, speaking to a very analog, antiquated infrastructure that we're all having to work with within our industry holistically, but more specifically in pre-con. So, I just keep coming at these as a former builder, but now technologist, and how do we merge these two worlds where you have best practices and all the talent in the world, but how can we better support that with great process, a digitized process and technology, just to really take that capacity down, drive that efficiency up, and the ultimate effectiveness.
As a trade partner, we obviously, it works very well for us from an MEP perspective to have an early seat at the table as much as possible, either through a partnering agreement with a GC or something along those lines. We've been seeing that happen more and more in our world, and it's been very effective for getting a seat at the table to start talking about specific designs, what costs more, what costs less, what's more available, what's harder to get, what is your specific need. And as I referred to earlier, if you have a client with a very specific, or shall I say prescriptive preset of specifications, you want to try to address those as early as you can. So being able to enter into partnering agreements like you and I were talking about, Klint, is very helpful for getting more people that seat at the table early enough to impact both cost and schedule.
Yeah, the owner, developer, the architect, engineer, obviously the GC, and the critical path trade partners all need to be involved early on just about every project. This one's a little hard. It's written in British. How do you ensure alignment and clarity on the roles and responsibilities of these people that are at the table when you're getting this project going, when you're putting it together, when you're moving it forward, onboarding?
Well, I think for us, and again, this is in conjunction with the GC, with a trusted GC partner. Sometimes they're called partnering meetings. Sometimes they're just, let's sit down at the table and let's talk about who's going to do what and what sort of input can you have. Sometimes that's a factor of how much of a budget is already set when a trade partner is brought on. That's why if they're brought on earlier, they can have more of a hand in helping set that budget, and therefore their role is more clearly defined. We're here to help you set a realistic budget for your client, for this project, and also impact the sort of things that are going to impact the schedule. Again, equipment, materials, and things like that. So clarifying that there's value in that and bringing those kind of partners on board as early as possible has been very effective for us.
Yeah, I think laying that out early is the key. It's communication. It's open communication. It's a partnering. It is a true partnering agreement. At Flintco, we don't use the term subcontractor. It was alluded to by Bill. He laughed at me earlier. We call them trade partners, because no one ever says, "Oh, my mechanical guy messed up my job." They say, "Flintco messed up the job," or whoever the GC is. So we take it very seriously that our trade partners are involved and those relationships are built so that we can have hard conversations. And it's not an argument. It's, I have a position, you have a position. We need to come together and work through that so that we can move forward with the project in the best way possible for the ownership group. We're stewards of their money and their project, so as long as we treat it as we're stewards of that project, then, you know, things can happen and we can work things out.
In my prior life, we did this a lot, design build or, you know, a CM at risk project, bringing in those partners because they're subject matter experts and they're going to bring a lot to the table. What it does come down to is that phrase I think I mentioned before, this certainty of outcome that you're striving for. You owe that to your client. They're expecting it. It's good for everybody. So by bringing those experts to the table, you're really thinking about that up front. And from a procurement strategy perspective, you put all those pieces in place and you bring the right partner on board. That's the front end, that's the strategy. The execution is where I think you see it get a little bit challenging at times. How does Bill and his expertise and his team contribute actively and be included in the conversations? Their ideas, how do they come forward? Or if it affects other designs or other trade partners, how does that get kind of adjudicated or processed? So what we're doing, though, is we're layering on more and more work, more and more manual effort to try to bring people physically to the table to have that voice and to track all the ideas and the issues. And, you know, if we could really fine tune that with better process, you know, just something a little bit more advanced that we should expect in the 21st century in our industry, really makes that all that much more effective. We're not there yet, but the intention is there. We've got, you know, great resources and great professionals coming to the table. But oftentimes, those ideas, the feedback going both ways becomes yet another challenge for an already busy team to execute on.
Well, if I could jump on the back of that too. In a current project that I'm working on, we have certain relationships kind of defined. And then, like Steve just said, he's speaking from a technological perspective. I'm going to speak from a functional, relational perspective too. We have roles defined. We have, say, the design build contractors, a fancy word for the general contractor. Right, thank you very much. And which is fine, and yet sometimes there are decisions that need to be made, and I'm in a situation right now where the design build contractor made a decision about who would specify and schedule certain parts of a project, and then in a coordination meeting after that, that particular design professional came out and said, you know, I really don't know very much about this. I don't know why I'm having to do this, because the engineer was having to feed them everything, and then we were having to review it for coordination. It's like, okay, note to self, let's talk about how we make decisions like this in the future. But that's part of the growth and the transition and the change, I think, as well.
What process changes need to occur to have this early team integration? What kind of commitments need to be made? It seems to me that in a design build situation, it's easier to make those commitments earlier because it's already been decided. But in a design, bid, build, where time decisions things can't happen really until that's all done. Is there some middle ground, or what can be done?
I don't think I saw any owners here in the Slido that was earlier today when they were talking
No,
about
you
who's
can
in the
talk about
audience,
it all you
but,
want. That's
I think owner education is the key, honestly, is having them understand the value of the trade partner engagement early on to vet out those different issues, whether it's supply chain, whether it's, you know, functionality, all those different things. The value that it brings to a project is immense. And the more we can have owners, stakeholders, you know, understand that, the better we can all perform. Hard bid is a fun word. It's, you know, the way that we used to always be, but it's you know, it's who's the biggest loser got the job, and no one likes to be the biggest loser, but at the same time, you still got to get a job. That's why CM and integrated project delivery methods, whether it's design build or another means, are very effective in, especially for a complicated project, working through those different iterations.
Just to develop that a little bit farther, Klint and I have had some, we cheated, we've talked about this a little bit, but it's very true. There are still owner entities, is that the best way to say that, out there that have some requirements in their RFPs that harken back to a hard bid day. We need 3 prices for this, we need 6 options for that, or whatever. And in a design build, or even a design bid build to a degree sometimes, those requirements can become crippling because it's harder to do what Klint was just talking about. How do you bring on a trusted trade partner that you know will do a good job, that you know is very, very good at what they do? They're very intelligent, they're very experienced, everything that you want in a trade partner. And yet you can't do that because your RFP documents require that you get 2 or 3 others. Now, you know, we've seen ways to try to work around that, but we've also seen places where, as a trade partner, we've had to say, we really want to help you, we can help you to this point, but we know what you're going to have to do because this is what the owner wants, and that's not going to fit well for us. So to your point, those specifics of transitioning, at least trying to transition certain owner entities into a different way of thinking and understanding of how to deliver their projects, but still feel like they're getting their best value for the dollar, is a critical thing we feel in our industry right now.
Yeah, it means developing a certain level of trust with those owners, I think, and some people's minds will never be changed, but it takes a lot of work. How do you ensure the right voices are heard for critical decision making, as opposed to the wrong ones?
There's plenty of those.
Yeah, there's lots of wrong voices. I think it's, again, it comes down to collaboration and we're working together. We will typically meet with our trade partners prior to meeting with the architectural team and design team and then ownership group, so that collectively every iteration of presentation is a collective. It's not, well, we think this, and you turn around in the meeting and they say, oh, we thought this. And it is a presentation, it's a group presentation every time moving forward, so that the voices that need to be heard have the ability to be heard at the right levels, so that when it gets to presentation to ownership, it is now a collective. It's not, oh, well, we think this and the design team thinks that, and we don't present information without, prior presentation to the design team. And if there's questions regarding, procurement of materials, like we always like to talk about, MEP is the one that always gets, skewered for longest lead time and picked on. But all of those things have to be vetted out early, presented, so that the design team isn't battling, the presentation from the GC. We're presenting a budget and why we need to procure this early. We need to do a work package or, GMP, or an early GMP just for procurement of these materials.
I think it's critical that the full picture is really assembled, because you could have a cost-saving idea provided by one trade partner, but there's implications with another. And you can't go and present something expecting an approval or a good outcome if you're only making it on kind of a half-baked decision set. You're thinking about time and life cycle costs and all the other things besides maybe just that first cost, and that in itself might be incomplete. So I agree with Klint and Bill in terms of, you got to get the right people together in the first place, but then the forum, whether it's just people getting together and hashing through this, or something that's also enhanced with some level of technology to ensure that it's all pulled together as one comprehensive package, and also presented in a way that the people that we're serving, whether it's a customer or an architect design partner, it's digestible to them, because we could be talking about things in a very technical, builder vernacular, and it might be just kind of going over their heads and they're not understanding the implications of what you're proposing. So whether it's a picture's worth 1,000 words or any of those sorts of things you fall back on, it's true. You got to take the complex and boil it down to the most complete, simple proposal, so that way you can expect to get a complete and an immediate decision. And that falls on the team, but everybody's got to contribute.
Yeah, know your audience. I think that's the key. Have your meetings, know your audience, know who you're meeting with early, then when you're meeting with them, know what they're going to need to hear, and know what the key hot buttons are. If it's performance, quality, life cycle cost analysis, if it's just the cheapest and the quickest and easiest, luckily we all try to avoid that scenario as much as possible, but what is the audience? What do we need to have prepared for them?
Well, and I would say that even going down another level to getting certain equipment manufacturers or material suppliers involved, at least so that we could bring that information, because you talk about life cycle cost, Klint, and some other things. There will be variations with manufacturers or type of equipment, and so given a situation, if we have the chance to speak with some of our equipment reps, for example, and find out from them, what's the best application? What do you see here? Or what are some different ideas that I might not think of and the owner hasn't thought of? We get those and we bring those to the table. So that I would consider would be a voice we want involved as well.
I have an answer for the next one, but I'm going to hold it off. At what stage should operation teams be brought on if you're in pre-construction?
As early as you can. I think they bring a tremendous amount of insight and planning, especially if they're the ones that will go out and execute on the plan. So I'm a big believer in if you can just unify the people and the processes and bring those stakeholders, because they are a stakeholder in the ultimate success of the project. They have to go out and build and execute the plan that is formulated by the front end team. And so they should very much be a part of it. How do we make that easier? How do we make it accessible? Because those are two different worlds. The front end and pre-construction, everything that we do in the front end is a whole just different set of processes than the execution of the project once it gets started. But how do you bring those two environments together, or those two unique personas into a common environment to where they can be productive and they can contribute? And also, be informed and have all of that history at their fingertips on how did we end up where we currently are in construction, and having that context available as well, I think is also a great benefit from having, those two, teams merged together.
Yeah, like I think I said it earlier, we bring our teams in from the very beginning. Pre-con, we know a lot about a lot of stuff, but we don't know a lot. The reality is I can't talk about dew points and whatever when it comes to mechanical systems. And somebody was talking earlier about, geeking out on the mechanical refrigeration. Awesome. I need you on my team because I don't have that information. I don't have that knowledge, but I know enough to know that I don't know that. And so having those people involved early on operationally, when we're looking at a large project on a large site, we can do this with 2 tower cranes. And they come, the operations team comes and said, no, you need 4. Why? Oh, things that we don't think of. We're just trying to make sure we've got it covered in the budget, but they need it to operate and to maintain their schedule because they have to pick material from different locations for different reasons, for different site constraints. So all of those things that typically pre-con is just worried about making sure you've got, the brick and the mortar and everything in the project. There's all those operational things that maintain schedule, that maintain the profitability of a project, that if we don't have them right at the beginning, if we don't have that input from the operations team, it's going to fail. It's never going to work. Let's hear your answer. I want to hear yours now. Yeah, you led with that little baited statement. Let's hear it.
So I agree with both of you, and Bill, though you didn't talk.
We're all on the same page.
But with a caveat. I want to hear the superintendent. I want to hear about the subs. But I don't want them in the process of getting the dollars together. I kind of build a little wall. I also want to talk with the superintendent. We have a joke running around about tower cranes on our jobs because, it's like, well, I got to have 4 tower cranes on this 6,000 square foot thing. It's like, obviously not. But you do need, those are the people that are going to build the job. And they need to have an interest in getting more work. And some companies that I've been involved with, there was some silos put up around that. It's like, look, just go get the work. Well, it's hard to get the work if you don't have all the best knowledge put towards it. So having worked on this operations side and now in pre-con, I think you need to have the best voices in your company, or outside if necessary, to apply to each pursuit. And
Yeah, I think if superintendents put together estimates, none of us would ever get a job. There'd never be another project built again because there'd be too much money.
Those guys
and
near the GCs or GRs or anything like
yeah,
that.
those,
You know,
they want everything under the sun. So there's that metered approach. We have to understand what they need, and then also have to be able to meter that back to what's reality and what's available and what can the project withstand.
right, exactly.
But the earlier they get brought in, I mean, you know, we build cookie cutter jobs and, you know, maybe those are straightforward, but the lion's share of what we're building, there's a sequencing, there's perhaps phasing, there's some very perhaps complex things to be thinking through. And ultimately that informs your budget. That's going to inform how you would otherwise structure your trade packages and the way you're going to bring on trade partners, and making sure that that scope, not just quantify what they see on the drawings, but the time and the levels of productivity, the access to the job are critical. When those things are left to be figured out right at the very end of the process or just through the bidding process, that's when you start to have those issues that come up during the execution phase of the job that's costing somebody money. It's either the trade partner, it's the GC, it's the owner, or all of the above. So the earlier that the insights and the brains of the superintendent, the project exec, the people who are going to be running the job can be brought in to influence and define the scope, not estimate it, but that way that how it's quantified and budgeted is reflective of how it's going to get built and the time associated with that.
I think one of the things too is we're talking about material early procurement. There's outside factors as well that come into play. Project that was 4 years in pre-con that we're currently under 2 years into construction on, we had to move a creek, which involved getting the Corps of Engineers involved. Anybody who's done work with the Corps of Engineers try to move a creek, it doesn't happen in a week, 2 weeks. It's a year to 2 years plus. So understanding that was a driver which gave the design team plenty of time to play around and come up with some really cool stuff that was, yeah, but those are the things
Never
as well.
mind, never mind.
Yeah, but I mean, it's fantastic, it's gorgeous, but, you know, those are the things that it's not just material procurement, it's all the other factors to get a project started, to be able to complete on time, that have to get evaluated early on.
We're going to move to the audience questions in the interest of time. Kurt, thanks, Kurt. Or Kurtz. How can you perform early equipment procurement through a sub or trade partner?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I don't want to trigger you up here. While maintaining competition for the balance of that package in a later GMP.
That's it's ownership. It goes back to what I mentioned earlier about getting ownership, understanding that early procurement. If they want to still see multiple bids, then we have to go and get multiple bids to procure the equipment, unfortunately. If we can switch it over to a teaming agreement and we have our trade partners involved and they're engaged, we can request from just that one trade partner to go out and get 3 different supplier quotes and keep it in that realm, which is a much cleaner way of doing that versus trying to have 3 different people going out and get multiple quotes and they all end up with their own margins, whatever they want to do with that. But it's that communication transparency to do that and make that happen. We've had to do that with some of our hospital jobs where some of the equipment had to be ordered, you know, a year in advance and things like that, where you have to engage those trade partners early, and you may write a separate GMP and that relationship with your trade partner, they understand they still may not even get the job, but they may just be procuring the equipment. It's not ideal. The idea is to keep them moving all the way through, but you know, that transparency and the collaboration to make that happen is what has to happen sometimes.
Well, and I might be cutting off my nose to spite my face here, but looking at the question, if it's a specific piece of equipment, whether because it's long lead, which is usually the case or whatever, owner, you know, you general contractors can, negotiate with the owner, why don't we have you pre-purchase that directly? We can help you with that, if it's just a specific piece of equipment. I understand the tenor of the question might be a little broader than that, but that's my first thought on that. I think it's also coming from the perspective of, okay, as a GC, how am I going to make sure I'm getting the best price? And again, I would say in the markets that we're in and with the partners that we've been working with for a few years now, we're at a place where there's some trust that because we might not be having a lot of competition, we're not necessarily doing the old school, let's load this thing up and make a lot of money right now type of thing, So some of this might be impacted just through relationships. Do you think that's a fair statement?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Next one's by anonymous. In your opinion, is stockpiling by contractors and perhaps trade partners causing further supply chain recovery issues? Or is it mainly the mega projects that are derailing the rebound? And by the rebound, I assume is like lower lead times. I mean, when I was here several months ago, they were talking about these mega projects in Saudi, and they were talking, we need to buy 42,000 pumps. And it was like, this is like the entire production of pumps by some large manufacturer. And that has to have I was thinking at the time, that has to have an impact on pricing and lead time and inflation, because that's all the production.
You're very right about that, Paul. And I've used an example in the past. There are data centers springing up all over the country, and they're not small. And every time you think you're through, they send you, oh, here's the next expansion. And they've settled on a certain type of HVAC equipment that they want to use to cool their data halls. And that has, just like you said with pumps, that has very severely impacted availability and lead time on that certain type of equipment, where it was a piece of equipment where someone would say, oh, I could save time and a little money using this instead of something else. Now it's just reversed. I'm on a project right now where we're using a water-cooled version of that piece of equipment versus air-cooled, and it's making all the difference in the world. So, yeah, point well taken there.
We saw it, I think, even not just data centers, but the big fulfillment centers. And I think there was one major company that won't be named, but the joist market completely dried up, and everybody was scrambling for steel joists. Who would have thought? But again, I just go back to, if you can stay out in front of that and as best you can anticipate those things and have the ability to explore alternatives, we're not ever locked into just one piece of equipment. It's really when you allow yourself to get your back against the wall and you don't have options and you don't have time, that's when you get into trouble. This is really about being more proactive and exploring and having the options at your fingertips so you can pivot from plan A to plan B without really setting the project back. Easier said than done.
This next one, and we have time for a few more. How do you ensure the client is getting the best value when utilizing design assist sub strategies early on, but there are no indicators with other bids? I mean, we will still bid that and get their, I mean, it's basically an RFP process for the mechanical or whatever it might be. What else can you do?
I think it's part of it is defining and helping them determine what best value means in the first place.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes, because we're busy and we're just working in this analog state, we're getting the answer as we see it, and then we just present it. This is who we need to use, and there's no why. There's no, how did you arrive at that? What was the process? How do I know I'm getting the best price? So there's process and competition to make sure you have 2 or 3 or 4 options to compare. But there's also historical data that you should also be able to leverage to say, hey, based on very comparable projects over the last 5 years, these options are in the neighborhood or they're an outlier and we need to do something different. But I think where we as contractors have really struggled is to really define and demonstrate how to measure that best value. And I think process is a solution. I think being able to leverage your data, which is not that easy in today's, state of things. But those are the keys to getting an owner to recognize and believe and trust in you as a trusted advisor for what that best value does represent.
It all comes down to the definition of best value. Is it the best price? Is it the best life cycle cost analysis? Is it the best installation quality? What is best value? And defining that with your stakeholders, ownership groups early on, I think is the key, because without that, best value just defaults back to best price, which we've all conceded is not always the best value for a project.
Yeah, and that comes down to what we spoke of earlier about educating owners, stakeholders, maybe a little bit. Okay, when we say best value, we're in reference to more than just price. We're this and that, reliability, quality of product, meeting schedule, staying on budget. All of those things go into being best value, which means that on the front end, maybe this potential trade partner is 3%. I'm just throwing out numbers above this one, but we know this is the best value because of these other factors. So like you said, Clint, it goes back to that maybe educating, but at the very least having that conversation. Okay, you say best value, define best value. What does that mean to you? Because if it is just money, then we need to come up with a different term. Low bid, something like that.
And we're going to shut down the questions, but I'm going to read the first part of the one of these questions. It says, "Great session." So, thank you.
We'll take it.
All right, let's have
one.
a round of applause for our panel, please.